Okay, let's get started talking about North America, the Native American groups, and the European explorers. Be advised, this is incredibly basic. You can get a lot more information from your textbook. I'm just providing an overview. So again, incredibly basic. There's so much more diversity than just this, but for teaching young elementary students, this is a very good sort of very good map to use to um, explain the variations or the differences between the different people groups who are in North America. So to the east we have the eastern woodlands. Centrally located we have the plains Native Americans. The southwest, of course, is the southwest region, and then we have the mountain region. So let's start with the mountains. We have some of the more noteworthy, I say noteworthy, the tribes that people are more familiar with are the Shoshone, of whom we know Sacagawea, the Ute, and the Washoe. We also see the culture here as being largely hunter-gatherer. And we see a lot of them running around without any clothes because it's too hot. Why would we do that? So very different from what they're going to encounter with the Europeans. In the southwest region, we see again some of the tribes that are more memorable in our textbooks, or that show up more in our textbooks, are the Navajo, the Hopi, the Pueblo, the Apache, and the Comanche. In fact, the Comanche have a vast empire. It's really quite interesting. But the Comanche command quite a bit of territory, and the Europeans are very much eager to cooperate with the Comanche. So they're sort of the major players in the southwest region. Their culture, we do see more farming, and we also see some permanent housing in the southwest region. For the plains, again, the more famous names are the Lakota Sioux, the Lakota and the Dakota, and they could possibly have been part of the mound building culture down in the Mississippi Valley. The Cheyenne and the Blackfoot. Their culture, we see hunter-gatherers, especially buffalo. They did not have horses until the Europeans arrived, so that is something that's incredibly, well, maybe not incredibly important, but it's something to make sure the students know. We have this stereotypical idea of the Native American riding his horse bareback to chase down the buffalo. No, that happened well after the Europeans came. They lived in teepees so that they could move about freely, and really it was to follow the herds. The eastern woodland region, we have the Wampanoag, the Iroquois, and the Cherokee. And it's with the Cherokee where we see the matrilineal type of society. And something that we will discuss in class is the idea of women's roles and how those changed with with an introduction of European standards. Their culture, we see hunter-gatherers, and there are some farmers, and they lived in wigwams or longhouses. So those are going to be more permanent structures than what you will find among the plains. Now, as the Europeans come in, we see three basic themes of European exploration: glory, God, and gold. Europeans want fame, not just fame, but power. They want power over their adversaries. There is a desire to spread their particular form of Christianity. There's the threat coming in with the Muslims coming from the east, and we have the Protestant Reformation taking place. So there is the threat within Christendom itself of it falling apart. So there is a desire among Protestants and Catholics alike. But to begin with, we see a lot of Catholics wanting to go and spread the gospel, to spread their particular religious beliefs in order to maybe, hopefully, in some ways, even gain an army. And then, of course, for gold. People want riches. They want wealth. There are three basic reasons that exploration took place at the time that it did with the people that it did. One is there's new naval technology, and there's new naval technology and there's improved naval technology. With tools like the quadrant and the astrolabe, which can measure distances and whatnot, and also improve maps. Suddenly, the world becomes much smaller than what it was. So, very, very important tools here. The second reason why European exploration takes place are politics. If you have more land, you can charge more taxes. If you have more taxes, that's more revenue for the king. So, of course, they want to spread out. And then the third reason is the Protestant Reformation. There is a competition for more power, as I mentioned earlier. There's a couple of countries that are more heavily involved in Europe than others. With Portugal, we see some of the more famous, and there are others, but the more famous explorers. We have Prince Henry the Navigator, who funded several voyages, Bartholomew Diaz, the first to round the southern tip of Africa, and Vasco da Gama, who's the first to make it to the Spice Islands. From Spain, of course, we have Christopher Columbus. Now, I want you to please, please, please refrain from sharing that lie with your students that Columbus differed from other Europeans and that he did not believe that the earth was flat. Referred to as the flat earth theory. Columbus was not out to prove that the earth was round. That was not his reasoning at all. In fact, most people generally believed in the roundness of the earth. So please don't teach that in your classrooms. Christopher Columbus is going for all the other reasons that we've stated before. He wants glory. He wants gold. He has this need, this itch for adventure, you know. So that's why Christopher Columbus is going about. Amerigo Vespucci, now he's an interesting fellow. He is actually the one who gives us, or who gives the North American continent and the South American continent its name, Amerigo, America. So here's a Florentine who has decided to travel. Christopher Columbus did not realize he'd found a new continent. He believed that he had found the East. And so in this search for the East, Columbus was adamant that he'd found it. And Amerigo Vespucci, as he's traveling, he starts making some very accurate maps. And he, along with others, say, wait a minute, Columbus, that idiot, he found a new world. Then we have Vasco de Balboa and Ferdinand Magellan, these two guys getting into and around the Pacific. Much further after, around about 100 years or more after Spain and Portugal, we see the French and the British getting in on the exploration. From France, we see people like Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain. And with these guys, they are particularly looking for a northwest passage to the east. Part of that European, that theme of European exploration, gold, is trying to find a very quick passage to the east in order to develop trade and to trade more quickly, cut out some middlemen over land, so on and so forth. They didn't find it, but they do find Canada, and so they start to make some settlements in what is now modern-day Canada. And while they're there, the French are rather important because these guys are the first to truly adopt native practices, and they're not overly trying or implicitly trying to change Native Americans. They are learning the way to hunt and skin, to look for certain animals. That's what the French fur trappers are doing, and that is really how they make make a name for themselves in history. The British, we see an Italian, actually, John Cabot, with his son Sebastian. They sort of lead the way to North America. And then, of course, we have Walter Raleigh, known for the Roanoke colony. Now, the Roanoke colony was established twice, and it failed twice. When Raleigh returned to the Roanoke colonists, he returned with supplies, but he returned much, much later than what he said he would. And Roanoke was completely deserted. The only clue left was the word Croatoan inscribed in a tree. So to this day, it is a mystery that people simply, we just don't know what happened to the Roanoke colonists. Now, as North America has come under the European microscope, and Europeans are wanting to settle more, and they're wanting to capitalize on what they have. They're going to need to establish colonies. They need people who can be there permanently, and not just be there permanently, but people who can know how to work the land, and they can understand its resources and how it can best help the crown, right? So, establishing colonies. If you're going to survive, there's a couple of things you need. One, you need to understand the lay of the land, how things operate, and what crops you can grow, and so on and so forth. But you also have to have workers. So, natural resources, a big part of planning where a colony will be established. We see, in order to have workers, some people fleeing from religious persecution, because again, the Protestant Reformation has been going on. Protestants are not the majority in the least, in any way. So Protestants in particular are looking for a safe haven, as it were, to practice their religious beliefs. And so we see a number of Puritans and other new Protestant believers who agree to indentured servitude. Indentured servitude is a sort of soft form of slavery. Someone pays for your travel, and perhaps for the travel of your family, and when you arrive in the New World, you will work for that person until your debt has been paid. But of course, all sorts of things can happen where you can accrue debt after debt after debt, to where eventually you never get out of debt to the person. So eventually indentured servitude does sort of fall out of favor, and we see not for the first time, the introduction of slavery. Now, in South America in particular, we see the Spanish and the Portuguese heavily trying to enslave the Native Americans. We see that some in North America, but not as much. And eventually, Native Americans are dying in droves, and this is for a number of reasons. One, there's a biological reason. There's sickness that Native Americans are being exposed to for the first time, in particular smallpox, and they are dying from it. But also, we have Europeans with more advanced weaponry, and with different forms of administration. So people like Hernan Cortez, who is an amazing political manipulator, and he's able to get, certain tribes to start fighting against other tribes, and yet they're all sort of on his side. So, so there's a number of reasons that sort of fall into this. Sugarcane is probably the main crop that attracts the desire to have enslaved workers. Now, as Native Americans began to fall out of favor with Europeans as a workforce, the African slave trade began to cross the Atlantic, and we see the transatlantic slave trade beginning. So why are we doing all of this? Well, there's this idea that the world's wealth is fixed. That's mercantilism. And since the world's wealth is fixed, that means we have to go as quickly as we can to get as much of the pie as we can, right? We got to get our piece of the pie, and our piece needs to be bigger than everyone else's. So we see, especially in places like Britain, with merchants who are considered very much a part of society and not an anathema, we see joint stock companies developing. And these are able to fund expeditions, they're able to fund colonies, and to establish that that necessary foundation for providing the capital in order to continue other ventures. Now, everyday life. In establishing English colonies, we see people when they come to America, when they come to North America, and we're going to look specifically, because this is U.S. history, excuse me, um, we're going to look specifically at the British and some at the French, but mostly at the British. So we have everyday life, becoming American. When they get to the North American colonies, life is obviously different. And so it's different for a number of reasons. One, this is not a quote-unquote civilized world. This is a place that has no classical architecture. There's no written languages. It's very, very different. So, and you've got hostile Native Americans and some who are willing to befriend you. So there's just a different way of living. Also, a lot of the people who are coming are considered like separatists. The Pilgrims, they're considered troublemakers. These are the people who don't necessarily want to conform. So again, like those indentured servants, we have people who are needing to get away from Britain for one reason or another. One reason could be for religious freedom, for the desire to get somewhere where they can worship as they want freely without persecution. Another reason could be they're a petty criminal. And there's other reasons as well, but we see the Pilgrims in particular. These are Puritans who've come from England, and they are desirous of establishing a city on a hill. They want to establish a society free of corruption, and that which is a more pure society. And they did actually arrive at the wrong place, and while they were there, they had to wait until they could get ashore, and they decided to write the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact was intended to keep them out of trouble with the king. It lays out emphatically that the Pilgrims were not in any way denying the authority of the king. However, it does specify their rights. So this is in many ways based on the Great Charter, the Magna Carta, where the barons sort of stipulated, hey, these are our rights as noblemen, what you can and cannot do, O king. So now we have everyday people who are not noblemen saying we're going to write down our rights. And this does lay a foundation for future action against the government, and it does provide an emphasis on written rights, and I'm sure you can imagine where that will head. There are three themes of the early English colonies, and this is just a very brief introduction to what we will get in our next lecture. The three major themes. One, religious liberty. There's a very close connection between religious freedom and personal liberty, which the colonists maintain over several generations. And it does open the door for numerous denominations to come to the American colonies and to establish themselves. So it's not just Puritans that are coming. It's Catholics, it's Anglicans, it's you even see some Jewish people coming over. There's all different kinds of people who are coming. And so we see that this connection between religious freedom and personal liberty is very, very closely tied. Second theme, economic freedom. Private property rights are very important for colonists, and we'll get into more about that later. Land equaled wealth. If you had land, you had security. So private property rights, very, very important for the colonists when they're coming from a place where they were denied that. However, this is going to cause issue between the colonists and Native Americans because Native Americans did not view land in the same manner. So there will be some hostility over that. And lastly, the third theme of the early English colonies is political protection. The government in the colonies was similar to England's, but it was much more self-reliant. I mean, it had to be. They're, thousands of miles away, across an entire ocean from their federal government, as it were. So, the colonies are much more self-reliant than what the mother country, what their government was. There's an increased awareness of the need for protection from governmental abuse. And sometimes distance can give you that clarity of sight. So, and this is going to establish some of those foundational ideas of why the American Revolution took place. So we'll end there for now, and we'll pick up next time with the early English colonies.